It was probably at least written during the time of David, and probably David's the king. Why else would you make a whole point of giving the lineage of David unless you're trying to show that he's the rightful king and he comes from Ruth and all that, who's from the right line? So probably, we don't know for sure, but if not Samuel, written during the time of Samuel, but we don't know. Probably written during the time of David, David's reign. Is very likely, which would about 930 would be when that would be, roughly. So, outline, Ruth renounces, Ruth reaps, Ruth redeemer, Ruth redemption. Just, you can kind of summarize that. I'm not going to go through that in detail. We'll look at on that. There's a real comparison to Ruth. I have that in your book on page 121. Ruth, boy, the comparisons is, Judges is filled with immorality. I mean, Ruth is filled with fidelity, righteousness, purity. I mean, very, very clearly. Ruth follows God, which is ironic. Ruth's not a Jewess, and yet she follows God, and yet the judges who are Jews, the people during the time of Judges, idolatry. Filled with devotion versus decline, love versus lust, peace versus war during the time of Judges, kindness versus cruelty, obedient faith with blessing, disobedience with sorrow, and great spiritual light in contrast to spiritual darkness. Very, very, very great comparison to the book. Audience, I have in your notes there on page 121, probably written to the United Nation of Israel. By Samuel, it's to show that David's the rightful king, very, very clearly. Some think it was possibly written by Nathan, and then it was to establish him before the newly established kingdom of Israel. Purpose for the book of Ruth, I have those on page 121, to encourage holiness. Really? During the time of Judges? Yeah. It's the comparison also during the time of David, to show that there's a need for holiness. God wants his people to be holy. To trace the genealogy of David very clearly. David is the rightful heir. Saul was the people's choice, right? Tall, good-looking, should have been, what people typically, will choose. And David's a man after God's own heart. If we get there, we'll see when God picks David. To give an example of the kinsman redeemer, what was a kinsman redeemer? What did he do? And then I love this one for us. I'm assuming most of us here are Gentiles, right? To show a Gentile being received into a covenant relationship with God. That's a key one. And that's like nothing new. It's not like, all of a sudden in the Gospels, when the Jews reject Christ, all of a sudden now God's interested in the Gentiles. No, God has had a heart for all the nations, for us. Most of us are Gentiles. From the very beginning, the whole point for his people was what? That his people will be a chosen people, and then will be a channel, a light to the nations, that all the nations would come and worship the one true God. Not that they would be, where the rabbis, some of the rabbis taught that the only reason God created Gentiles was to be fodder for hell. That was not God's purpose or plan at all. Right? He had a heart for the nations. He had a heart for the Gentiles, for us. So that's a really key. You see that so clearly in the book of Ruth. And then to demonstrate how God supplies for the needs of his people. Okay, God faithfully supplies. Amazing. Naomi and Ruth were in just a no-win situation. They have nothing. They've lost everything. No future, no hope, and yet God is faithful to them as they seek him. Yeah, Becky.
Can I suggest another purpose? It points forward to the ultimate kinsman redeemer, prefigures that Christ would be man.
Yeah, that's possible. I'm trying to focus on the authorial intent, which we look back and we see that. It's illustrative, but there's nowhere in the New Testament that actually refers to that. So I'm kind of a little precise on that, but it is. It's a very, like Joseph. Joseph is a wonderful illustration of Christ, and yet there's no New Testament that says that. But the term kinsman redeemer, definitely, I'll go with that. I agree with that 100%, is that as a kinsman redeemer, that Christ is the ultimate kinsman redeemer. No question about it. Christ is the ultimate, that word goel, Christ is the ultimate kinsman redeemer. Far more than practical and physical, right? He's going to be the one who is he's able to, right? Just as Boaz was able to, he had a relationship. So Christ is able to redeem us. Why? Because there's one mediator between God and men, the man, Christ Jesus. Christ had to be a man to be a redeemer. So yeah, there's some wonderful theology in that, very clearly, very, very, very clearly. Yes, that he is our kinsman redeemer. Yeah, very good. Yeah, Dick.
Was Boaz a kinsman of Ruth or of Naomi?
Was Boaz a kinsman of Ruth or Naomi? Not of Ruth. Why could, well, way back. But as far as an official kinsman redeemer, it's of Naomi. He's a kinsman redeemer. But because of Ruth's connection to Naomi through her son, who she's married, Naomi's son, who dies, then Ruth becomes connected through that. She is under Naomi's, I guess you'd say, authority, because she married into that family. So in that sense, so ultimately, yeah, you're right. Boaz is the kinsman redeemer for Naomi, but I mean, she's past childbearing, and so there can't be the continuing on of the line, and so that he takes that through Ruth. Good question. Yeah. Okay. Overview. You see Ruth's love demonstrated and Ruth's love rewarded. There's just kind of 4 chapters of the book. It's pretty clear. I think this chart's in your book. They're on page 122. Let's look at some specific issues, okay? And I'm going to keep moving through this. I think most of us are familiar with the story, okay? But I'm just going to hit some of the high points of that. Look in your notes or in your Bibles in Ruth 1:1-2. It came about in the days when the judges governed. Read our Bibles. It says, this is what happened. There was a famine in the land. Why do you think there was a famine in the land of Israel? Judgment, right? Why? Because we're in the time of the judges, when they're constantly being judged, these cycles of judgment. So that's why it is. This is a time of, that tells you, it's another hint, time of great disobedience. Because what did God promise? If you're obeying me, I will send rains, you will have crops, all your cattle will multiply. So that little phrase there tells you it's a time of judgment upon the people. So, famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem, same Bethlehem where Christ was born. Bethlehem literally means land of bread, which there's a famine in the land of bread, tells you something. A man of Bethlehem of Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahalan and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. Now they entered the land of Moab and remained there. Okay, give a little background. You say, wait a minute. Ephrathites, are they? No, that's just saying where they're living. They're Jews. Okay, they're Jewish people living in this place. They entered the land of Moab. Okay, just kind of map-wise. Here's, remember, how do you know where Jerusalem is? Just go straight across from top of the Dead Sea. It's going to be called Jerusalem. It's called Jebus at the time because the Jebusites in the time of Judges were in control of Jerusalem. Israel hasn't conquered Jerusalem yet. David hasn't. She's the great-grandmother of David, so he hasn't done that yet, right? And so it's the Israelites are not. They initially conquered it during the conquest, but they don't control it. But they're from Bethlehem. Okay, so time of famine. So they cross over the Jordan River right. They cross over the Jordan River right here, and they go down. They go down to this region of Moab. Okay, I think I have a picture. Yeah, there's a picture of Moab. We're looking. You're on the Israel side of the Dead Sea. You're looking over into the land of Moab, Transjordan. It's like as if you're in what's called Qumran, where the Qumran caves are. You're kind of standing there, looking. That's where they went. So they kind of went around the top of the Dead Sea and went over to Moab, which was not a part of the Promised Land. Reubenites, Gadites, they're in here, but the Moabites, that's not. These are not Jewish people. I mean, these are descendants through Lot, ultimately. So that's where they go. But what happens? Next verse. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. She was left with her 2 sons. Okay, so she's a widow. She raises her 2 sons. We don't know exactly how old this is, but they took for themselves Moabite women as wives. Not Jewish, okay? Not Jewish, okay? Once again, all of these things are telling you what? Times of disobedience, right? All these things that are happening. Should they have left the land? No, you're not supposed to leave, unless God directly tells you. There's no indication in the text that God told them go into Moab. No indication of that. They marry non-Israelite women, which God particularly warned them and not to be careful of doing. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they lived there about 10 years. And then both Mahalan and Kilian also died, and the woman was bereft of her 2 children and her husband. Okay, so catastrophic. They're in a famine. The whole land is disobedient. And because of that, there's a famine. They go over to Moab, hopefully, because Moab's parts of it were very lush. They think they're going to find food there. Apparently they did. But then their 2 sons get married, and both of them die. The husband dies. And so now in this culture, they were completely without resources, right? There's no men. There's no men, no husband, no fathers, no husband to take care of anything. And so they're absolutely bereft. They are absolutely, it's a hopeless situation. This is remind you of Judges 21. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Elimelech thought, I'll go over to Moab. Well, he's just doing what's right in his own eyes. He's not supposed to do that. Oh, we'll just marry foreign women. They're not supposed to do that. They're just doing what's right in their own eyes, what feels good at the moment. And so this is a classic setting for lots and lots of disobedience. So difficulty turns into tragedy, and so Naomi decides what? She decides to return to her home because she has no other. What's she going to do? She doesn't know. She's a foreigner. I mean, no one's going to take care of her. No one's going to take care of her at all. And in a sense, she's a hot potato. I mean, we don't want anything to do with this lady. I mean, are you kidding? I mean, she's a foreigner. Her husband has died. Both her sons have died. She has nothing, and so she decides to go back. So she decides to go back to her home. And so she says to Orpah and Ruth, "Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband." In other words, I'm not going to, the whole levirate marriage, we'll talk a little bit about that. She's not going to have sons. She says, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you therefore wait until they're grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. And so she just urges them. She says, go back. Now they both initially come, follow, and then Orpah says, okay, I'm going back to Moab, to my family. And she does, but Ruth says no. And probably the most well-known phrase in the entire book of Ruth. It's often taken out of context, but it's a great phrase. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you. No, stop, Naomi. No, I'm going with you. I'm going with you. Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Here's the key. Here's the key phrase. It really tells you a lot about Ruth. Your people shall be my people. What people were those? The Jews, the Jewish people. I'm going to be as a Jew. And then here, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Yahweh, do to me and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. Okay? Powerful declaration of, she is not following the false gods of the Moabites, right? She's following the true God. In spite of all the disaster of Elimelech and all the things that had happened, somehow what came through was their God. And she has truly said, I will follow Jehovah, the one true God. And that's why she's going back with her. She's not going, you know what, I've heard there's bread. I've heard there's food in Bethlehem. I want to go with you. It's not very good in Moab. No, this is it. She says, I'm going to follow your God. I'm going to be as a Jewish. I'm going to be as a Jewish person. That's what she declares. And so they do. They come back. They both went until they came to Bethlehem. When they come to Bethlehem, all the city was stirred because of them. Everyone is just, oh, this is Naomi. Is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Mara means bitter. I went out full. She had a husband. She had 2 sons. But the Lord has brought me back empty. In a sense, less than empty, right? Now she has someone else dependent on her. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me? Yeah, there's a bitterness, obviously, in Naomi, and she is, it's very clear, and yet God's going to meet her even in her struggle, even in her brokenness. God's going to meet her, and God's going to provide for Naomi. We tend to focus on Ruth. God's going to provide for Naomi. At the end of the book, you'll see it, where she holds her grandson on her lap, and she then comes full circle and ultimately realizes what's really happened in this situation. So what are they supposed to do? Naomi had a kinsman of her husband. Here's the key word: a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. That's her husband, whose name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. She said to her, go, my daughter. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened accidentally, I don't know how this happened. No, sovereignly, she came to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. The word, he is a man of standing. He was a mighty man of valor. These same words are used of Gideon, and he's a man of valor. And in God's sovereignty, she just happens to come to gather grain in Boaz's field. I'm on the top of page 124 if you're not following with me in my notes, just to make sure where you are. And so she gets there, middle of the page, Ruth 2, 8, and 9, and Boaz says to Ruth, and Ruth comes back and says, hey, I met this guy named, you probably never heard of him, Boaz. Boaz? I mean, of all the people, and she tells Naomi she met Boaz, and what is, and so what does Boaz say? Boaz says to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter, do not glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. Why is that significant, considering the time of the book of Judges? She is incredibly vulnerable to be abused, absolutely, as a young woman who has no husband to take care of her, protect her. Now Boaz is saying, no, you stay here, and I'll make sure nothing happens to you. And I've told my servants, nothing's to happen to you. When you're thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants may draw. There was God had provided in the law that they were when a farmer would reap his fields, that you were to leave the edges, and if you dropped some stuff, you just had to leave it lie. That was their system. For if you were a poor person, then you were allowed, you were encouraged. Now you had to work for it. They didn't bring it to you. You had to go get it. You had to work, and it was hard work, but you provided. And so they were to glean after the reapers, and so they would go through and they would get enough food that they could survive on. And so as she was doing that, and because God provided for that. And Boaz says, stay here. Don't go to anyone else's fields. I will make sure. I'll make sure that you are taken care of. And what else does Boaz tell to his servants? What does he say to them? Pardon me? Yeah, he tells the servants, and drop some extras. I'm not going to ding you if you aren't real efficient. Be super inefficient and leave a lot behind in front of this young woman named Ruth, right? He wants to care for her. Now, don't read into, this is truly a pure and innocent wanting to care for someone that's vulnerable. It tells you a lot about the heart of Boaz, because later on, he will register major surprise when she indicates that she is open to him being the kinsman redeemer, because he's older. I'm just not in that picture. I just need to watch out for her and care for her, because we're in the middle of a really bad situation during the time of the judges. So she comes back and she tells Naomi, and then Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, oh my, and here's where you see Naomi's heart just absolutely changing. May he be blessed of the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, the man is our relative. That's the word. He is one of our closest relatives, the kinsman redeemer, Goel. He is one that can do something about our situation. And so, it's just this is the turnaround. This is the drama. a good story has drama, a lot of problem, and then here's the hinge point of the book. And so, Naomi is the mother-in-law with a plan, okay? She's got a plan, and God's going to use her plan. It's good. God's going to use her plan. As a precursor to that, do not read anything at all impure into this plan or what happens there, because it's not at all. It's very appropriate what she does. It's a very public situation. There's nothing inappropriate or impure in it at all. But she gives her some real practical advice, because they've gathered all the grain, and when you gather the grain and you have all the grain in it, what do you need to do with all the grain that you've gathered? What? You have to thresh it, okay? But what do you need to do during the time of the judges? Protect it. So you're going to sleep there, right? So he's sleeping there. He's staying there because someone's going to steal it. Because before they can thresh it, they have to protect it. So she says, wash yourself, therefore, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, go down to the threshing floor. Do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you'll notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Uncover his feet. Why? Because his feet are going to get cold. He's going to wake up. I mean, this is practical. So don't put anything weird about it. And then he will tell you what you shall do. And why? Now, Naomi, she knows Boaz. She knows this is a man of a good reputation. She knows there's not going to be any funny business going on here. He's a man that can be trusted. And so she does that. And so it happened, God's sovereignty. In the middle of the night, the man was startled. Why? Because his feet are uncovered. And he bends down, and behold, a woman is lying at his feet. Who are you? It's dark. You can't see. And she said, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering. And there's meaning behind that word covering. And your protection over your maid. For you are, and she uses the key word, goel. You are a goel. You are a close relative. She's not just asking him for a handout. She's saying, I want you to be the kinsman redeemer, ultimately, who will marry me and who will provide for me and will be the close relative that God has provided in his system of the law to watch over me and provide for me. And so that's what he does. I mean, I'm not going to go through this in detail. Now he just overloads her. He sends her back to Naomi with just a whole bunch of grain as a special blessing. And then Naomi says to Ruth, you just wait. This man is not going to let this go by. He's going to make sure this is settled. And look down there in verses 10 to 13. I don't have it in my overhead, but it's in your notes on page 125. Then he said, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than your first. What was the first kindness? First kindness was being committed to her mother-in-law, that she doesn't go back like Orpah did. That's the first kindness, okay? The second one is, here he says, by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. She has a reputation of godliness too. Now, it is true I'm a close relative. I'm a goel. But there's a relative closer than I, more closely related. Remain this night. When morning comes, if he will redeem you, good. Let him redeem you. He's trusting the sovereignty of God. He's not going to manipulate the situation. But if he does not wish to redeem you, I will redeem you. As Yahweh, Lord, lives. Lie down until morning, okay? Everything's pure about this situation, but he is committed. He has basically committed himself to her. And so he sends her back with as much barley as she can carry to her mother-in-law. And then we get back, and then he says, I'll go the next day. We're in the morning, go to the next day. I'm on the bottom of page 125 in your notes, Ruth 4, 3 through 4. So he goes to the city gates, because the city gates is where you would take care of these situations. It was like the courtroom, I guess you would say, where the elders would be sitting. And he gathers together. He says, okay, we need to all gather together. We're going to take care of something. He says to the closest relative, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And so I thought to inform you, saying, buy it. Now, you say, wait a minute, what are we talking about land here? I thought we were talking about Ruth. No, it's the land, because the land blessing was directly connected to everything in the land. And so when you're out of the land, as in Naomi and Elimelech, you're out of the land, but when you're in the land, it's a sign of blessing. So it's all about the land. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, if you'll buy the land, redeem it. But if not, tell you that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I'm after you. In other words, you're first in line to redeem this land after Elimelech. He doesn't have any sons, right? His sons have all died. No one can take care of it. So there's no one to pass it down through. So it needs to go to someone. You're closer, so you need to buy the land. No one but you. And then what does the guy say? Okay, great. I'll redeem it, of course. I want more land. I'll take care of that. I'm going to be more prosperous. And then Boaz says, oh, wait. By the way, there's a little minor detail. And it's the only detail he could care less about the land. On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. We talked about this in detail. I'm not going to go into detail. Levirate marriage, that was a thing at that time where God wanted to continue to pass down through his people. And he just gives in this minor detail. But that's all that matters. That's ultimately all that matters. And so what does the stranger do? Not stranger, what does the close relative? He says, no way. This will complicate my inheritance. I mean, there may be people who will try and take my inheritance from my children. So no, I don't want it. It shows all he cared about was the land. He doesn't want to get anything complicated with Ruth. All he's concerned about is practical things. And so on top of bottom of that page, the requirements of a kinsman redeemer. Kinsman redeemer, you can see at the bottom of page 125, he had to be a blood relative. He had to be able to redeem the inheritance. He had to have the resources to do it. He had to be willing to redeem the inheritance. He had to meet the demands of the law. It's similar to what Becky raised earlier, that Christ he met the requirements of the kinsman redeemer. Spiritually for us, but Boaz met those requirements. What were the duties of a kinsman redeemer? Levirate marriage. He had to marry her, okay? He had to marry her. If there was a close relative, he was a death of a close relative, he had to avenge that, but he also redeemed the land. And so he gets that land. And so the closest relative says what? 8 and 9, for chapter 4. He said, buy it for yourself. And you say, what is this about sandals? Okay. Now we sign things. If you buy a home, or when you get you get a notary. Well, this is kind of a real practical way of a notary. Okay. Because everyone knows, I got the sandal, okay? And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witness today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. In other words, I've bought all their land. I'm redeeming it. Moreover, as a side note, the most important thing, I have acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. Okay, so this is now there's a little side note. In this situation, you're supposed to trade if someone wasn't willing to do that, you take the sandal. What was something else they were supposed to do in the Old Testament? If someone wasn't willing to redeem, you're supposed to spit in their eye, because it was considered absolutely despicable that you did not do what you're supposed to do. Now that's not in here. It's not referred to, and they didn't do it because they're in time of Judges, not doing that kind of stuff. And also, Boaz is really happy with the situation. He couldn't be more delighted because he gets Ruth to be his wife. And so what happens? Boaz and Ruth get married. He redeems her. And in God's sovereignty, there were no children, right? They were married. It says they were there 10 years, okay? So there's no children from either of the sons. And yet, it seems like very quickly here, Boaz and Ruth, they have a child. And Naomi, grandmother, full circle, right? The woman that came and said, call me Mara, bitter, full circle. Amazing what God does. Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generation of Perez. And there's a listing of the generations, all the way from Perez down to David. And so we come to full circle in the book, and here's a little chart, I think, I have it in your notes there. a little chart. Here we have, just so you know the connection, here you have Abraham, okay, his brother, I guess you'd say nephew, Lot. The Moabites came from Lot, and then ultimately down to Ruth, and then through Abraham you have Judah, Perez, and there's some blanks in here, but Boaz, and then Boaz and Ruth come together. They have a son named Obed, who has a son named Jesse, who has a son who will ultimately be great-grandson to Ruth named David, who, amazing story. So this isn't just, you miss the point of the story if you say, oh, what a wonderful, sweet example of God providing for someone in great need. That's great, but that's a secondary part of it. Why? Because you see the author, whoever this is, whether it's Samuel or Nathan, we don't know, but he is showing that God is doing a work here. God is doing a powerful work. Yes, he's providing for these people, but he is doing a powerful work behind the scenes. Anytime you look at a biblical narrative, there's always three levels that you want to consider, okay? First level that we tend to see very clearly is, what is God doing in the individual life? Like here, okay, what is God doing in Ruth and Naomi's life, right? What's he doing? But then there's a second level, is what is God doing in his people's lives? Either the church or the Israelite. What is he doing? Well, he is in the people of Israel here. He is setting up who's going to be the ancestor of their king. The second king, but really the first real king of Israel. But what is he doing in his overall plan? That's the third level. A foundational level. In every narrative, what is God doing in his overall plan? Individual level, Ruth and Naomi. National level, what is he doing in the people of God? But then the foundational level, what is he doing in his overall plan for the Messiah to set up the plan? So just an amazing, amazing book for us. Okay? Implications. What implications does the book of Ruth have for our lives today? Okay, before we look at the book of 1 Samuel, if all Scripture is profitable, what are some implications for us as we consider the book of Ruth? What are things you can think of?
Jesus was man.
Okay, great. Christ was a man, 100% man. Because why? You're going to go to Matthew. When we went through the book of Matthew, we went through the genealogies, right? And it went through all those genealogies. Guess who's listed there? Ruth is listed there. She's a part of that. Christ truly had ancestors. He was 100% man. He had to be a man. There's one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus. And so Christ was fully man. He had ancestors, just like you have ancestors. All of you have great-grandparents, right? Well, David had great-grandparents. Who were they? Boaz and Ruth. He had some others, but these are the ones we know of. Okay, absolutely. Christ was a man. Great implication. Great implication. What else?
He didn't sin.
Who? Christ. Okay, Christ was a sinless. He was unique. Christ didn't sin. Against the context of the book of Judges, where we see it's filled with sin, Christ was a sinless man. Great. Good. Excellent. What else? Yeah, Gus.
God normally works through mundane, ordinary things that just are part of what we think of.
Yeah, great example. God ordinarily works just through mundane, normal things that are just a part of life. Now you say, what's miraculous here? I mean, doesn't like all of a sudden bread appears, or no, we see it as miraculous because we're behind the sovereignty of God, but it's just mundane things. Just mundane things. She went to a field. She's walking down a path, and there's a field over there, and I'll go to this one. And she goes over here, and mundane, right? Very mundane things. Gathering grain, gathering barley, servants. I mean, it's just normal things. A threshing floor. Very normal things. But God works through those things. I think in our lives too. We, pray for the miraculous. Yeah, but the miraculous is God sovereignly working through the very mundane, normal things of life. The fact that you're here, the fact that if you're married, who you're married to, all of those factors. It wasn't because of some miraculous. It was God worked through mundane things, but that show His sovereign hand. Very clearly, we see in the book of Ruth. Excellent. Yeah, Becky.
The importance of ordinary,
Okay.
living a life to honor God in all the mundane things.
Yeah, the importance of ordinary integrity in the small things, right? Just think of Boaz, right? We have a man of integrity that he's not thinking, wow, if I do this right, I'm gonna get a wonderful wife, and I'll be in the line of the Messiah. He's not thinking about that at all. He's just, here's a woman in need. She needs to be cared for. She needs to be watched out for. I'm convinced he had no preconceived that if I do this, this will happen. He's just, this is the right thing to do in this situation. This is the right thing to do. And even Ruth, when she goes back with Naomi, she's not thinking, well, if I do this, she's not read the book of Ruth. She didn't have it. She's in it. But she doesn't know if I do this, then all these things are going to happen. She doesn't know that. She just, I want to follow the one true God, and I'm going to follow you, Naomi, and I have no idea where this is going to go. It could very easily be worse where we're going, but just an ordinary life of integrity. Do the right thing. What does the Bible say about this situation? It could be in your marriage. It could be in a financial dealing. It could be something at work. It could be in a parenting situation, whatever it is. What would God have us to do for His glory? We just do what God would say by His grace for His glory and trust Him. And then He orchestrates all of that for His glory. Not trying to figure out, well, no, God's sovereign, you're not, right? God is working. Obviously, Ruth and Naomi and Orpah and Elimelech, and none of them are sovereign. God is. And I love that. Great implication. God works in normal circumstances. As His people, just follow Him. Just follow Him and obey Him. And then you're part of a miracle, right? Because God did it. And I've often said, I want to be a part of a church and a family and individual that it's not explainable based on human means. It's God's grace. God just did a work. We don't know. Why did He do that? I don't know why He did that. He did that for His glory. And that's what you see in this book. I love it. I love it. Very good. Okay, another practical, follow God even when it's hard. Even when it's hard. Even when it's hard. Follow God even when it's hard. And God can redeem our failures and sin. Right? Naomi and Elimelech, no, they shouldn't have gone over to Moab. But God still works. You say, well, I did some horrible things in my past, and it's okay. It's not okay at that time, but now it is. I look back and say, I just need right now that simple obedience. What would God have me to do? And I trust Him, and He's going to work for His glory. Okay? Yeah, Dan.
Jesus chose to be our kinsman redeemer.
Jesus chose to be our kinsman redeemer. Unlike Boaz, he just kind of be in the right place at the right time, then he chooses. But Christ comes down to do that, to be our kinsman redeemer. Absolutely. He left the glories of heaven so that He could be our kinsman redeemer. What a wonderful picture of our Savior. Absolutely. We'll take a look at 1 Samuel, okay? Book of 1 Samuel, okay? Kind of turn the pages in your Bible. I'm not sure how far we're going to get into this. Book of 1 Samuel. And it's directly connected to the book of Ruth, obviously, because it just kind of flows right out of that, because it's during the time of the judges. Samuel ultimately is going to be a judge. What's the theme of the book? I have it in your notes there. I'm on page 127 if you're in your notes. The theme of the book is leadership transition. Okay? What do I mean by leadership transition? The transition of leadership from the judges to the kings. Samuel was a judge. That's what he did. I mean, look at what he did. It's very obvious. That's what he's doing. He's a judge. He's a warrior judge too. I mean, he kills Agag with a sword. I mean, he was a mighty man too, Samuel himself. But it transitions the book from a judge, do we have the first king to Saul. It's a transitional book between Judges and the Kings. It's about 1120 to 1010 BC, so about 3,000 years ago is when it happens. I'm just working my way down. The name takes the name from Prophet Samuel. He's the first important character in the book. The earliest Hebrew manuscripts, they don't divide. There's no 1st and 2nd Samuel. Probably they divided them at that size real practically. That's how much fits on a scroll. You can't get 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's too long for one scroll, so they divided it. The book was just called Samuel. Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, was the first version to divide it into two parts. The Vulgate calls this 1st and 2nd Kings, and then what we call Kings is called 3rd and 4th Kings. So the name is not necessarily inspired, it's just a practical thing. Author, it's anonymous, though it's hard to believe that anyone but Samuel, who seems to be right in the middle of all of it, could have written it. It describes his life and his career. Obviously, there's a point where someone else needs to help because it talks about his death and later on, as far as 2 Samuel. But it's hard to, we just don't know exactly. It doesn't say. The Bible doesn't want us to necessarily know. Okay? Let's go to some specifics in the book. I'm on the bottom of page 127. Okay? There's 129. Okay, my page numbers are different than yours. There's a certain man from Ramath Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim. His name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. Now, once again, when you see Ephraimite, it's key. It shows you who he's descended. That's the location that he was from. Why? Because Samuel is going to serve as a priest, which is exclusively left for the Levites. And 1 Samuel 2, it says that God will raise up a faithful priest. So Samuel is really a Levite because he serves, right? He serves clearly. He's serving with Eli in the temple. Elkanah, 1 Chronicles 6 tells us that Elkanah he's a direct descendant of Levi. So ultimately, he's a Levite. He's living with the Ephraimites, but he's ultimately a Levite. He has to be because of what he's doing in the temple, right? I mean, he's right there. Samuel's right there. A Levite by lineage, but an Ephraimite by residence. Now this man, Elkanah and Hannah, interesting combination of names, would go up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. The two sons of Eli, remember these two guys, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord there. What does that little phrase tell you? Who the priests were? Hophni and Phinehas. These are very evil men. It says they were committing fornication ultimately in the gates of the tabernacle. I mean, they were very, very wicked men, and they were actually functioning as priests while they were doing the works that a priest would do. So it's once again, we're at time of what? Judges. We're at the tail end of the time of the Judges. Very difficult time. So here's a map. If you were to go straight across, Jerusalem, which would later be called Jerusalem's pattern right there, but Ramah, and then Shiloh. Why do I tell you Shiloh? Because the tabernacle is at Shiloh at this time. It's not at Jerusalem. Why is it not at Jerusalem? The Jews don't control Jerusalem. They don't control Jebus. It's at Shiloh, which is a key. Once again, remember we have the coastal plain. You have the coastal plain in this area from our geography class. You have the Shephelah, the lowlands here, and then you have the Judean highlands here. And Shiloh was in the Judean highlands before you get to the Jordan Rift. Kind of a picture of Shiloh. I think this was taken about 2015. They're doing a major excavation on Shiloh. Martha and I were there. We actually kind of dug a little bit and did some stuff and got some pottery. And I think we were right over in this area, right over in here. But all this has basically been dug down because they realize this is such a critical area. This is a really key place. Why? You wouldn't think, but it's protected because it's on a hill, so you could defend it really well. It's got valleys all around it, and so you could defend Shiloh really well, which is why they're going to put the tabernacle here. Because remember, in the time of Judges, there's all kinds of people coming and going, fighting against the people of Israel, so they have it in a protected place. This is kind of an aerial view, a little more, but there's something very significant that they found not long ago, within the last 10 years, about Shiloh. What is it? Right here in this area, and we were at this area. We stood on this area. There's an area that's basically the exact dimensions of the tabernacle. It's exactly right. And they actually are finding things there that clearly reflect. Like they find all the bones from the left side because the right side are, there's so many things that are directly connected. This is where the tabernacle was. And they even found where it was. When we were there, they actually found these stones. They had just found them a couple days before. They had these stones where these big and holes in the stones, and there was the gates where the city, they call it the hinge points of the gates of Shiloh. That's where it was, and it was right here. And so this is where Hannah and Elkanah would go up to from the area of the Ephraimites. Now, see, Hannah had an issue that was very, very common for ladies that were God's going to work through. It's mothers of the Hebrew race, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, were by nature barren. They weren't able to have children, yet God does a sovereign work. So you see this very clearly. And Hannah is going to be one of them that is in this. And barrenness at this time, it wasn't just a regret because they weren't able to have children. There was also the whole hope, the expectation for every Hebrew mother that possibly she could be the mother of the Messiah. And it's not possible if you don't have children. It was also who's going to take care of you, because this was their welfare system, was your children to help take care of you. And so there was a lot of reasons for this. The Jews also, Scripture indicates that children are a blessing from the Lord, but they wrongly reversed it to say, well, it's a curse if you can't have children. God didn't say that. They made it that. And so because of that, there's a lot of difficulty. And Hannah's barrenness did not diminish. Actually, it multiplied Elkanah's love for her. He said, am I not better to you than 10 sons? He loved her. He's very thoughtful. But her there's two wives. Remember the time of Judges. The other wife, Elkanah's other wife, Peninnah, was brutal. Just mocked her. And so it was very difficult. So she goes to the tabernacle, and she goes up there with Elkanah, and she's praying to the Lord. And who hears her? Who hears Hannah praying? Who? Eli. Now, showing a sign of the great spiritual depth at this time, what did Eli think about Hannah praying? What did she think? He says, stop your drunkenness, woman. It's like no sensitivity. Well, he also has sons that are doing horrible things, and so there's just a real lack of sensitivity here. And she says, no, and she explains what's going on, and so then she receives a blessing for that. But then she has she goes. God promises her, and through Eli, she ultimately has and she promises, she says, if I have a child, if I have a son, I will give him back to the Lord. And she follows through on that. She follows through on that. So she has a child. And she dedicates him to the Lord. Samuel's birthplace is about 15 miles away. He's born in Ramah. He's about 15 miles away from Shiloh. And so she leaves him there. Think about the situation, okay? You're going to leave your 3-year-old son at a place where lots of really, really, really bad things are happening, and there's no clear spiritual leadership, right? And it shows that she is trusting God. She's absolutely trusting God in this situation. And God protects, obviously, Samuel in the middle of that. But Eli is being a very, very... and then we have Hannah's song in chapter 2. I'm not going to go through that in detail. It's one of the earliest poems in the whole Old Testament, a wonderful, just an amazing song that she has there. Let's look at Eli's unfaithfulness. Okay, so God speaks to, God sends a man who gives Eli a message. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 29, a man of God, so there are men of God, comes to Eli. We don't know who this was, and then really rebukes him. He says, through this man, God says, why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I've commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat? Now, this is actually literal, right? Eli, we know, was very, very fat. Why? Because later on, when he hears that the Ark of the Covenant has been captured, he's so fat he falls off and he breaks his neck. So literally, make yourself fat with the choices of every offering of my people Israel. God had provided for the leaders to be, the priests to be provided for through the sacrificial system, but they're taking advantage of that. Therefore, the Lord of Israel declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. And so God rebukes Eli and says, the line's not going to continue. It continues for a while, even it continues into David's kingship, but then it stops, and it will not continue on after that. Why? Because he has another priest, and ultimately it's going to be Samuel. And we'll see Samuel, and look at chapter 3, verses 1 through 18. It's that great story. Most Bible storybooks have this because it's such a sweet story. It literally says in 1 Samuel 3, I think it's verse 10, where it says, the Lord Lord came and stood. So there was some kind of, it says he stood there, and it had to be Christ, right? Because Christ is the only one who takes physical presence. But he calls 3 times. Samuel doesn't, he thinks Eli's calling. He goes, what do you want, Eli? No. And then Eli realizes, God is talking, God is calling, because God's been silent. And so God is speaking to Samuel. So God calls to him, and he speaks to Samuel, and he tells him what's going to happen, and it's horrible. Basically, it's that God's going to replace Eli, and Samuel is going to be the priest, and ultimately to follow after him. The word of the Lord is very rare, and so that's what happens. He becomes the priest, and he's also a judge at the same time, and it's very, very clear. God had just said, I'm going to remove you from that. And so then we get to and while this is happening, we get to the story of, I call it God in the box. I'm on the bottom of page, is it 127 on your, whatever it is? 131? Okay, 131. The bottom, 1 Samuel 4, verse 3. Who are the arch enemies of the Israelites at this time? Who was Samson fighting against? Philistines, okay? So it kind of gives you an idea time frame-wise. And so the Philistines, they're fighting against the Philistines. And so the people of the Israelites have a really bright idea. Well, it's not a bright idea, but they think, hey, if we get the Ark of the Covenant, we can't lose. It's kind of like a rabbit's foot. It's the ultimate rabbit's foot. That if we have this, we can't lose. And so 1 Samuel 4, 3 and through 4 says, when the people came into the camp, the elders of Israel said, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of the Lord, that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who sits above the cherubim. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. I mean, what's wrong with this picture? Everything's wrong with this picture. I mean, you're doing the wrong thing. The unholy guys are carrying it. I mean, everything's wrong with this picture. I mean, they thought that if they, if we have the Ark of Covenant, we can't lose. It's God in a box. And so the Philistines, they were a people from the Aegean. They had migrated into this area, and when they hear the Ark of the Covenant comes into the camp, they are very, very, they're very dismayed. So let's kind of look at a map of what happens. So the Ark of the Covenant is up here at Shiloh, okay, and they bring the Ark down to where they're battling. So they're battling near Aphek and Ebenezer, and the Ark. The Philistines are very afraid because they've heard the stories. They know this is the God that has delivered them from the Egyptians. They know all the things that have happened. But they say, let's just fight and see what happens. We're going to lose, but let's fight. Well, actually, they don't. I mean, they conquer, they kill thousands of Israelites, and they kill them, and they kill Hophni and Phinehas, and they capture the ark. They get the ark. Now they have the ultimate rabbit's foot, but it's not a good thing for them because they're not supposed to have it, okay? And so it becomes the hot potato, and I use it respectfully, that they just pass around from city to city in the Philistines, because every city that has it, horrible, horrible things happen. They put it into the temple of Dagon, their god, and what happens? They wake up in the morning and he's fallen down, and so it's bad. I mean, things are really, and they ultimately gets. They take it all the way down here to Ashdod. They keep it at the Temple of Dagon. Then they say, we don't want it. They take it over to Gath. And know anybody that's from Gath? Yeah. Goliath. I mean, so there's connections here. We're seeing stories, connections. Then they pass it on to Ekron, and then they realize we better get rid of it. And so from Ekron, they say, we got to get rid of this. Let's put it on a cart, a cart, and we're going to get with two young calves that are still nursing, so they're not going to want to leave their mothers, and so we'll see what happens. And the cows immediately leave, and they go directly toward Israel, showing that obviously God, this is where it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to have it. But even though this happens, it comes up to a place called Beth Shemesh. The people of Israel are super excited. But what happens? They desecrate it. You thought it was bad before. It says in the text that 50,000 people, Israelites, not Philistines, Israelites die because they look into the ark. They treat it in a way that they did not treat God ultimately as holy. And so so then they ultimately take it to Kiriath Jearim, where it's going to stay until the time of David, where the ark is going to stay until the time of David. And so it's a great example of that God's not going to be used for someone else. Now, there's a side story when Hophni and Phinehas, when they are killed. It says in the text that Eli, he did not want them to take the ark. He's very reluctant to let them take, because he knows, even though he's got all kinds of issues, he did not want them to take the ark. He knew this is what they should have done. So they take the ark, they take it to the battle, they lose the battle, 30,000 people of Israel die, and then it says that they begin to hear about the battle. It said a man of Benjamin comes back from the battle, comes to Shiloh. He tells them, he says, what does this commotion mean? Listen to chapter 4, verse 13. It says, and he came, the Benjamite, Eli sitting on his seat by the road, eagerly watching him. His heart was trembling. For what? For his two sons? No. For the ark of God. Now the man came to tell it to the city, and the city cried out. Eli heard the noise of the outcry. What does this mean? The man came hurriedly and told Eli. Eli was 98 years old. His eyes had set. He couldn't see. The man said, I am the one who came from the battle. I fled from the battle line. How did it go? Bad news. Israel's fled. There's been a great slaughter among the people. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And then he says, the last thing he says, and the ark of God has been taken. It says in verse 18, when it happened, when he mentioned the ark of God, not when he mentioned his sons, when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell off the seat backward beside the gate. His neck was broken. He died. For the man was old and heavy. Thus he judged, keyword again, judged Israel for 40 years. And so it's a time, this is in the area of the tabernacle that this happens, where they come back. The messenger comes back. And so it's a time of great catastrophe. And then we're going to see, we'll have to tie it up there. We'll see another man. Actually, let's do it real quick. Not real quick, but let's just look at it, because this is a key transition. So we have that whole time the Ark of the Covenant has been captured, but then it ultimately is returned. It's in Kiriath Jearim, but it's time now to select another king. Time to select another king. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, Samuel. So Eli, where did Samuel learn his parenting? Where did he grow up? Probably Eli. Samuel's sons as well don't walk with the Lord. His sons are not following the Lord. And so the people, it says they had dishonest gain. They took bribes. They perverted justice. They were supposed to be the leaders, and they weren't. And so the people say, we want a king. We want a king. Now the people say, we want a king who can lead us out into battle. Who's supposed to lead them out into battle? The children of Israel? God. God is ultimately their king. And yet, it's not unanticipated. Deuteronomy, God anticipated there would be a king. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. And so they were supposed to have a king. There was supposed to be a king, but he ultimately says, it's a God that I choose. The first king is not going to be God's choice. The first king, he's going to let them have what they want. Many times for us, it's when we get what we want, it's not necessarily a blessing. Sometimes it can be a judgment of God, and this is a judgment of God, is when they get Saul. And so we have the choice of Saul, and we're going to look at that. So it's 1 Samuel on the back of page, what page is it on? 133? 4? 134, the choice of Saul. We see Saul. Saul was probably about 40 to 45 years of age, and it's a little, there's some text in 1 Samuel 13 a little confusing, but Saul was probably about 40 to 45 years of age. Why do we know he's that old? He had an adult son. Jonathan's an adult at this time, so he has to be at least 40 to 45 years old. So Saul's an older man. It was still, not older, but in the sense that he was still in the prime, and so he's going to get ultimately, and there's a whole process where he's chosen. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but Saul, Saul is supposed to go find his father's donkeys, which shows you there's details that God gives because it's a real story. Saul meets Samuel near Zuph, and he anoints Saul to be the king of Israel. Samuel anoints him. He's supposed to be the king. Saul's 2 donkeys are found. They tell him. Saul prophesies at the high place of Gibeah. He prophesies. Why? Because the Spirit of God comes upon him. He wasn't a prophet necessarily, but he just prophesied. It's the Spirit of God. God spoke through Balaam's donkey. God prophesies through Saul. And so he's ultimately chosen to be the king, but he is not God's choice. Well, how do you know? I'm going to jump ahead and we'll tie it up here in 1 Samuel 13. Where Saul assumes priestly office, that Saul took a role that he was not supposed to take. He's the king. The battle is not going well. He wants to sacrifice. Samuel says, wait a week, I'll come. It says he waited 7 days according to the appointed time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people are scattering. So Saul takes upon himself the role of a priest, and that is not, you're not supposed to do that. And so 1 Samuel 13:14 says, but now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out a man for his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Wow, what a statement. Here's the king, and yet God is saying, you didn't follow me in something really basic, and that is you assumed priestly office, you disobeyed what Samuel had said, and because of that, it's setting up for what? This king after God's own heart. We'll see another situation next week what Saul does when he doesn't obey fully in one of the battles. Let me finish one last thing. I've got to go with this. Every Bible story book, anytime I ask our grandkids what Bible story they want to read, this is the Bible story. They are, well, particularly the boys, they love this Bible story. Okay, Jonathan's Courage, because it's a great one. It also gives, this is so ironic, right? If you look at who is the only one that had kids that walked with the Lord, who was it? Saul, right? Eli, Samuel, even David to a degree, and yet it shows God's grace. God's grace. You have Jonathan, truly Jonathan walks with the Lord. So they're fighting against the Philistines. Jonathan says to his young man who was carrying his armor, come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. There are 2 swords in Israel at this time. Who had them? Saul had one, Jonathan had one, okay? They're the only ones. Like when you read Bible story books and say, no, there's only 2 swords in all of Israel because the Philistines had taken them all away from them. And so Jonathan has one of them. And so this is actually the physical place. This is where they're going to have the battle, where they're going to climb up. So Jonathan tells him, the Philistines are over on this hill over here. Jonathan, the Israelites are coming over here. And Jonathan and his armor bearer are down in the valley. And they say, well, how will we know? Well, we'll know if they say, come up to us. And it's like, no, that seems like the opposite. It was like, they'll come down to us, they're more vulnerable. No, he says, what's the most vulnerable thing? They'll say, come up to us. So he says, okay, we'll do it. So they ultimately say, if they come up to us, this is called the Wadi Suanit, is what this is. But this is the area where Jonathan and his armor bearer are going to climb up, and then they're going to fight against the Philistines. It said they kill 20 of them. What happens? They kill one, gets his sword, armor bearer. So they have 2 swords now. They kill 20 of them, and basically because of Jonathan, not because of Saul, because of Jonathan, they defeat the Philistines, and it's a major turnaround at this point. So we see a great example. We'll pick Jonathan up next week when we see with David. Jonathan ultimately becomes David's best friend in a very powerful way. Okay, next week we'll start with 1 Samuel 15. Saul's disobedience and rejection by God. What are some implications we can learn from this first part of 1 Samuel? What are the things you think of? You think of Hannah, you think of Samuel. What are some implications you can think of for our lives when you consider God is recording this for us? What are the implications of our lives?
Raising kids is important.
Raising kids is important. It's not the primary implication, but there are some great implications from Genesis, but also from this about the significance. Eli is rebuked. Why? Because he didn't rebuke his sons. Very key. Raising kids is very, very important. There are great ramifications. And really, it's also related to Eli's example, right? Because it says he made himself fat on the thing. So there are things that he wasn't walking with integrity. Raising kids is very, very important. Very, very important. Okay? Good. What else? Hey. Another side note is God uses imperfect people too. Saul, we can't give him all the credit, but somehow Jonathan walks with God. Yeah, Saul obviously had lots and lots and lots and lots of issues. And I wouldn't say follow his parenting plan, but I'm just saying, yeah, somehow God did a work. God did work. And some of you weren't raised in situations where there was a great influence, and yet Jonathan walked with the Lord. You can't choose the heritage you're given, but you can certainly affect the heritage you leave. Okay, good. Someone else, implication from these first section of 1 Samuel. You see God's care. I think of the book of Hannah. You see God's care and concern. You see, this is kind of like a nobody, Hannah. And yet God's care and tenderness, his concern for, particularly if you read Hannah's song, it's a great song. And she gives God glory for the birth of Samuel. And so you just see God's care for the hurting. It's not just God's doing a work with his people as a whole. He could care less about the individuals. No, Hannah is one example of many, 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 many other individuals that God had great care for and great concern for. Okay, we'll pick up there next time. Let me close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you that you record these details because they're important. They tell us how things happen, but they also are great examples of how you work sovereignly in your people's lives. Thank you. May we live accordingly in your name. Amen.